They called me fastidious. For 19 years, I had cataloged xenos artifacts in the Ordo Xenos archives beneath the Basilica of Eternal Vigilance, recording dimensions, inscribing provenance, maintaining the collections that proved the alien could be understood and contained. My mentor said my dedication honored the Emperor's wisdom. I believed him. I believed the artifacts were safe behind 40 meters of consecrated stone, that knowledge was power, that understanding our enemies made us strong. My name is Lysan Torreth, third archivist of the Xenological Collection, and I want you to understand something before we begin. I thought I was serving humanity. I thought the screaming in my dreams was just stress. I thought I could study corruption without being corrupted. I was wrong about all of it. The archive maintained its temperature at 11 degrees Celsius year-round, cold enough that I wore 3 layers even in summer, cold enough to preserve organic specimens indefinitely. The air smelled of preservation fluid and old parchment, that particular chemical sweetness mixed with dust that coated your throat after a full shift. I arrived each morning at the beginning of the 4th hour, passed through 3 security checkpoints, submitted to the daily psychic scanning by interrogator Velez, who never smiled, never spoke, just placed his withered fingers against my temple and searched for taint. I always passed. I was clean, pure, faithful. My workstation occupied a corner of Vault 7, surrounded by 15,000 cataloged items behind armored glass. Eldar spirit stones that had gone dark. Tau technological fragments deemed too dangerous for general study. A Necron scarab that twitched occasionally despite having no visible power source. And Collection 47 Phi, the subject of my current 5-year analysis. Artifacts recovered from a craft world designated as Ulthway derivative, though the classification was disputed in the documentation. 312 items. I had examined 94 in detail. My reports were thorough. I was proud of my thoroughness. The work was methodical. Document exterior appearance, dimensions to the millimeter, material composition verified through non-invasive spectral analysis, any iconography or text transcribed phonetically, with translation attempts cross-referenced against the linguistic databases. Then, internal documentation, if applicable, weight distribution, suspected function, historical context from recovery reports. Every detail logged into the archive permanence ledgers, those massive vellum books that predated digital record-keeping and were maintained in parallel because technology could fail, but parchment endured. My handwriting had improved over the years. I took pride in that too. I prayed before each shift began, as we all did. The litany of clarity, asking the Emperor to guard my thoughts against Xenos influence, to let me see truth without corruption, to make my service worthy. I meant every word. I felt his protection like a warm weight on my shoulders. I felt safe. The first wrongness appeared on a morning like any other. 63 days before everything changed. I was examining item 47 Phi-95, a small sculpture approximately 12 centimeters in height, carved from what spectral analysis suggested was psychoreactive crystal. Eldar make, clearly, with that characteristic flowing aesthetic they apply to everything. All curves and impossible grace. The figure depicted was humanoid but abstract, gender ambiguous, posed in a gesture that could have been dance or supplication or ecstasy. Beautiful, in that disturbing way Xenos artifacts sometimes achieved. I documented the external features, noted the base inscription in Eldar runes I couldn't translate, logged the item number and date. Then I opened the recovery report. Collection 47 Phi had been recovered from craft world Shai Ishura, which Imperial forces had engaged 417 years ago during the Gehenna Compliance. The military section was standard: fleet disposition, engagement duration, casualties. But the recovery team's notes contained something that made me pause. The artifacts had been found in what the team designated a temple space, though the translator noted uncertainty about the word, suggesting it might mean sanctuary or perhaps prison. The team leader, Inquisitor Malorian, had written in the margins, "Subjects appear to have gathered these items deliberately, not cultural artifacts in natural settings, collected, arranged, worshipped or guarded, unclear which." I set down my stylus, looked at the sculpture again. The base inscription suddenly seemed less decorative, the posture less abstract. I should have reported the observation to my supervisor. Protocol required any deviation from expected analysis to be immediately documented and reviewed. But something held me back. Curiosity, perhaps, or the archivist's instinct that finding patterns was my purpose, that I should understand before I reported. I told myself I was being thorough. I told myself I would mention it in my next quarterly review. I did not tell myself I was afraid of looking foolish. I spent my lunch break in the linguistic reference section, pulling lexicons I normally had no need for. The base inscription proved surprisingly straightforward once I found the right reference grammar. She who thirsts. 3 words in Eldar. I checked the translation 4 times, certain I had made an error, but the grammar was unambiguous. She who thirsts. The Eldar word for thirst carried connotations our language struggled to capture: desire, hunger, need that consumed. She who thirsts. I knew that phrase. Every archivist knew it. Inquisitorial briefings had covered the major xenos threats, including their so-called gods. She who thirsts was the Eldar name for the youngest god, the 4th of their pantheon's dark elements, born from their civilization's fall. The Prince of Pleasure, some texts called it. The Despoiler of Flesh. The academics used the Eldar name, Slaanesh. I sat very still in the linguistics section for longer than my break allowed. The sculpture depicted a chaos god. The sculpture I had been handling, examining, documenting for 6 hours. The sculpture sitting on my workstation right now. My hands started shaking. I forced them steady. Reviewed what I knew. The archives contained chaos artifacts, yes. But they were housed in Vault 1, the deepest level, behind psychic barriers and in stasis fields. They were never assigned to junior archivists. They required 3 levels of authorization just to view the catalog entries. Collection 47 Phi was Vault 7. Standard Xenos material. Eldar cultural debris. Not chaos, unless the classification was wrong. I returned to my workstation. The sculpture sat where I had left it, catching the cold vault lighting in ways that made the psycho-reactive crystal seem to shift, to move, to breathe. I picked up the recovery report again. Read more carefully this time. Inquisitor Malorian's notes continued on the 3rd page. Recommend items in Collection 47 be reclassified pending further investigation. Subjects showed signs of corruption prior to engagement. Advise treating as potentially compromised material until verification complete. The date on that recommendation: 416 years ago. 1 year after recovery. I checked the archive permanence ledgers. Collection 47. Phi. Classification. Xenos material. Cultural origin. Standard security protocols. No mention of chaos taint. No mention of Inquisitor Malorian's recommendation. No indication anyone had ever followed up on the investigation he requested. The vault was very cold. I had never noticed how cold before. I should have stopped there. Reported to Interrogator Veles. submitted the discrepancy for review. Let the proper authorities handle it. But I was an archivist. Finding truth in records was my purpose. I told myself I was just being thorough. I told myself that if I reported an error and was wrong, my career would suffer. I told myself I needed to be certain first. I was lying to myself. I already knew the truth. I just did not want to face what it meant. Over the next 18 days, I examined every item in Collection 47-Phi that I had already documented. 23 pieces total. I found the pattern immediately once I knew to look for it. Item 12. A jeweled mask with an inscription that translated to Rapture Unending. Item 19. A blade whose pommel bore the 6-pointed star that appeared in certain restricted texts. Item 31. A ritual cup engraved with scenes I now recognized as depicting the cult's inquisitors burned. Every single item I had examined bore some mark, some symbol, some inscription that connected to She Who Thirsts. Every single item had been cataloged as standard xenos material. I checked the original classification reports, the documents filed when Collection 47-Phi first entered the archives 4 centuries ago. The intake archivist had noted concerns, had flagged multiple items for chaos verification, had recommended immediate review by someone with demonological expertise. That archivist's name was Harren Volen. I searched for his subsequent records, found his death certificate 3 months after filing the intake report. Cause: suicide. Method: threw himself from the Basilica spire. The death investigator noted Vol had been acting erratically, claimed to hear whispers, displayed signs of chaos corruption. His recommendations were struck from the record as compromised by heretical taint. The next archivist assigned to Collection 47-Phi was Mercyn Cade. Her documentation lasted 7 months. Then she requested transfer to a different vault. Her request was denied. Her next appearance in the records was 6 months later. Executed for heresy. The specifics were sealed, but the execution date was recorded with bureaucratic precision. 4 more archivists over the next 100 years. 3 dead. 1 disappeared from all records, except a single notation. Reassigned. Every single one had worked on Collection 47-Phi. Every single one had noted concerns, requested reclassification, asked for help. I was the 6th archivist assigned to this collection. I had been working with it for 5 years. I checked my own documentation with hands that would not stay steady. 94 items examined in detail. 94 reports filed. 94 pieces of chaos-tainted material I had handled, cataloged, studied. I checked my psychic screening records. All clear. 19 years of daily scans, not a single flag. But 5 archivists before me had passed their scans too, right up until they started showing symptoms, right up until the corruption manifested. The vault was very cold, but I was sweating. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in my hab cell staring at the ceiling, feeling something move in my thoughts, like oil on water. Probably imagination. Probably just stress from the discovery. But my hands would not stop shaking. And when I closed my eyes, I saw the sculpture's ambiguous figure. That gesture that could have been dance, or supplication, or ecstasy. And I found myself wondering what it felt like. That moment of surrender, that release into something bigger than the grinding routine of existence. I reported to the Vox Confessor the next morning, submitted myself for spiritual examination. The priest asked the standard questions. Have you experienced inappropriate thoughts? Have you felt the pull of temptation? Have you doubted the Emperor's protection? I answered honestly, no. The Vox Confessor declared me spiritually sound and sent me back to work. I passed Interrogator Velas's psychic scan without incident. I was clean. I was fine. I was safe. I spent the day documenting Item 47 Phi-96, a ceremonial dagger with a grip that fit too perfectly in my hand, that felt warm despite the vault's cold, that whispered possibilities I told myself I could not hear. I logged its dimensions, recorded its markings, submitted my report at the end of shift exactly as protocol required. I did not mention that the markings spelled out promises in a language I should not understand. I did not mention that I dreamed about the blade that night, dreamed about what it would feel like to use it, to cut away all the rigid structure of my life and let something raw and true pour out. I did not mention that part of me wanted to. The pattern I had discovered gnawed at me through the following weeks. 5 archivists dead or disappeared, their warnings buried or discredited, their concerns ignored. Collection 47. Phi remained classified as standard xenos material despite centuries of evidence suggesting otherwise. Someone had made that decision. Someone had looked at Inquisitor Malorian's recommendation, at Heron Vol's concerns, at 400 years of archivists reporting chaos taint, and decided to do nothing. Or worse, decided to maintain the false classification deliberately. I started investigating during my off hours, visiting the administrative archives 3 levels up, where personnel records and procedural documents were kept. I told myself I was satisfying intellectual curiosity. But I knew the truth. I was looking for someone to blame, looking for evidence of corruption or incompetence that would explain how such an obvious error could persist for centuries. Looking for a villain, so I would not have to face more disturbing possibilities. The administrative files revealed Collection 47. Phi's classification had been reviewed 17 times over 4 centuries. 17 separate inquiries, triggered by archivist concerns or routine security audits. Each review reached the same conclusion. Classification confirmed. No changes required. Concerns unfounded. Each review was signed by a different administrative officer, spanning multiple generations of bureaucracy. No single corrupt official. No conspiracy of heretics. Just 17 different people, across 400 years, looking at the same evidence and reaching the same decision. The most recent review was 13 years ago, 3 years before I was assigned to the collection. The reviewing officer was Prefect Holland Meir, who still worked in the administrative section. I knew him slightly. We shared the same refectory, occasionally nodded to each other over morning recaf. A thin man, perpetually tired, always carrying data slates with too many unread reports. I had never considered him sinister. I had never considered him at all. I requested a meeting, cited archival research needs, was granted 15 minutes on an afternoon when the administrative section was quieter than usual. Prefect Meir met me in a small conference room, smelling of recaf and old paper. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. His augmetic left eye whirred as it focused. "Archivist Torreth," he said. "What can I help you with?" I had prepared my approach carefully, kept it professional, academic. "I am conducting comprehensive analysis of Collection 47 Phi and noticed some discrepancies in historical documentation. I found your classification review from 13 years ago and hoped you might clarify some procedural details." He sighed, set down his data slate. "Which collection?" 47 Phi. Eldar artifacts from Craftworld Shai Ashura." Something changed in his expression. The weariness deepened. His augmetic eyes stopped moving, fixed on my face with unblinking focus. "You have been assigned to that collection for how long?" 5 years, Prefect." "And you are experiencing concerns about the classification?" The precision of that question told me everything. He knew. He had known when he reviewed it 13 years ago. He had known when he signed the confirmation, keeping those artifacts classified as safe. Yes, Prefect, I said carefully. Multiple items bear iconography associated with chaos corruption. Previous archivists noted similar concerns. I found Inquisitor Malorian's recommendation from the initial recovery report suggesting reclassification. But your review confirmed the existing classification. I wanted to understand the reasoning. Prefect Mir was silent for 38 seconds. I counted them. Finally he spoke, and his voice was very tired. How much do you know about how this facility operates? I understand the basics. We catalog and study Xenos material to better understand alien threats. No. He shook his head. That is what we tell junior staff. That is what most of you believe. But the Xenological Collection serves a different purpose. Do you know how many Imperial citizens encounter Xenos artifacts each year? Across 1 million worlds? I have no estimate, Prefect. Neither do we. The number is incomprehensibly large. Traders bring back trinkets, soldiers take souvenirs, colonists find relics. Every single item is potentially dangerous. Every single item could corrupt, could spread heresy, could destroy an entire world if sufficiently tainted. We cannot examine them all. There are not enough Inquisitors in the entire Ordos to examine even 1% of the recovered Xenos material. So we make choices. We establish protocols. I do not understand how this relates to Classification 47 Phi. The artifacts in that collection are chaos-tainted, Prefect Mir said flatly. Obviously. Any competent analyst would recognize it immediately. Heron Vol recognized it. So did Merson Cade. So did you. So did I, 13 years ago when I reviewed the classification. And I confirmed it should remain designated as standard Xenos material anyway. The conference room was very quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat. Why? The word came out smaller than intended. Because the alternative is worse. He leaned forward, and I saw something in his organic eye that might have been pain. If I reclassified Collection 47 Phi as chaos material, protocol requires immediate transfer to Vault 1, which means examination by an Inquisitor with demonological expertise, which means investigation into how chaos artifacts remained misclassified for 4 centuries, which means investigating everyone who handled those items. Every archivist, every administrator, every security officer, every cleaner who mopped the vault floor. Hundreds of people. And do you know what happens when an Inquisitor investigates for chaos taint? I did know. Everyone knew. Purge protocols. Purge protocols, he confirmed. Not execution of the guilty. Execution of everyone potentially exposed. Because chaos corruption can hide, can wait, can spread through a population like disease through dirty water. Better to burn the entire section than risk missing even one infected soul. Hundreds of people. Archivist Torreth. Most of them completely innocent, most of them just doing their jobs. Killed because they happened to work in the wrong section of the archives. But the risk, I said. If those artifacts are spreading corruption. Do you feel corrupted? He asked. 5 years handling those items. Do you hear whispers? Do you dream of forbidden knowledge? Do you feel your faith wavering? I started to say no. Stopped. Remembered the dreams. The way item 96 had felt in my hand. The moment standing in the linguistics section when I had wondered what it would be like to just stop fighting. Stop maintaining the constant discipline. To let go. Prefect Mary saw my hesitation, nodded slowly. You are experiencing minor psychological effects. Intrusive thoughts, disturbing dreams, perhaps moments of philosophical uncertainty. These are normal responses to studying chaos material. They do not indicate active corruption. Interrogator Veles scans you daily. If you were truly tainted, he would detect it immediately. But the effects are enough to be concerning, yes? Enough to make you question? Yes. Now imagine you are me, 13 years ago. You discover this classification error. You know reclassification means the death of hundreds of innocent people. You also know that in 400 years, no one has become seriously corrupted. 5 archivists died or disappeared, yes. But compare that to the alternative. 300 people burned on suspicion, their families investigated and possibly purged. The entire facility locked down for months while inquisitors root through every record looking for additional taint. 5 deaths over 4 centuries, or 300 deaths immediately. Which choice serves the Emperor better? The logic was sound. Horrifyingly sound. I wanted to reject it, to find the flaw, to argue that proper procedure mattered more than expedient mathematics. But I could not. The numbers were clear. 5 versus 300. The choice that caused less suffering. So you condemned me, I said quietly. You condemned every archivist who would be assigned to that collection. You sent us to work with chaos artifacts knowing we would be exposed, knowing some of us would die, and you did it to protect the bureaucracy. No. His voice was sharp. I did it to protect 300 innocent lives. I made the choice I believed would result in the least suffering. I have questioned that choice for 13 years. I have lain awake countless nights wondering if I am wrong, if I have damned myself through cowardice disguised as mercy. But I made the choice. I signed the confirmation. I am responsible. What about the next archivist? I demanded. What about when I die like Heron Vol, like Mercen Cade? Will you just assign someone new and let it continue? Yes. No hesitation. Because the alternative remains worse. The calculus has not changed. I will make the same choice again and again. For as long as I work in this facility, someone must be willing to make these decisions. Someone must be willing to bear this weight. I am tired, Archivist Torreth. I am old, I am uncertain. But I am still here, still doing this work, because I believe someone must. I sat in that conference room after he left, staring at nothing. My faith had been built on certainties. The Emperor protects. The Imperium serves humanity. Evil is external, alien, identifiable. Follow protocol and remain pure. Trust authority because authority serves truth. Prefect Mir had shattered every certainty, not through corruption or incompetence, through choice, through mathematics, through the terrible logic of triage applied to human souls. 5 archivists dead over 4 centuries, sacrificed knowingly, deliberately, to prevent a larger purge. The system working exactly as designed. The horror was not that it had failed. The horror was that it had succeeded. I returned to my hab cell that night and threw up until nothing remained. Then I lay on the floor, shaking, trying to reconcile what I had learned with what I believed. The Emperor protects, yes, but protection requires sacrifice. The Imperium serves humanity, yes, but service sometimes means choosing who dies. Follow protocol, yes, but protocol includes allowances for calculated loss. Trust authority, yes, because authority makes the choices too terrible for individuals to bear. The logic held. That was the worst part. It all held together perfectly. An ideological structure with no cracks, no weaknesses. Just an endless series of impossible choices that justified every atrocity through comparison to greater atrocities prevented. Prefect Mir was not evil. He was exhausted. He had made a decision he believed was right, would make it again, would carry the weight of those deaths because someone had to, because the alternative was worse. I wanted to scream. I wanted to report him to Interrogator Velis, to demand justice for Heron Vol and Merson Cade and the others. But what would I report? That Prefect Mir had followed proper triage protocols? That he had made the decision that minimized casualties? That he had sacrificed 5 lives to save 300? Any inquisitor would agree with his logic. Any administrator would confirm his math. I had no argument against him except my rage at being one of the sacrificed. I was not important enough to save. None of us were. The calculus was clear. I did not sleep that night. I spent the hours reading. Not archives, not documentation. The texts we kept locked in the theological reference section, the philosophical treatises on the nature of chaos. I needed to understand what I was exposed to, what was happening to me, what Slaanesh truly was. The texts were frustratingly opaque, written in the careful language of scholars describing something they feared to name too directly. But patterns emerged. Slaanesh, the youngest god, born from the Eldar civilization's collapse, not created by violence like the blood god, not by despair like the plague god, not by ambition like the architect, created by excess, by the pursuit of sensation pushed beyond limit, by civilization so advanced, so wealthy, so free from necessity that it turned inward, seeking ever greater experiences, ever more intense pleasures, until desire itself became God. The Eldar had murdered their own gods through hedonism, had created Slaanesh through the collective psychic weight of billions of souls pursuing perfection, pleasure, experience without restraint. She who thirsts, born hungry, consuming Eldar's souls even as she was born from them. The youngest of the Chaos gods, but perhaps the most insidious, because her temptation was not rage or despair or ambition. Her temptation was release. The promise that you could stop fighting, stop maintaining discipline, stop denying yourself. That sensation was sacred. Experience was worship. Pleasure was truth. I read descriptions of Slaaneshi cults on Imperial worlds, not the sensational propaganda about depravity and excess, but the clinical documentation inquisitors filed. The cults rarely started with violence or obvious transgression. They started with art, with music, with philosophy groups discussing the nature of beauty, with people gathering to share experiences, to celebrate sensation, to explore the boundaries of what flesh could feel. Innocent beginnings. But the progression was inevitable. Seek pleasure, find it insufficient. Seek greater pleasure, find it insufficient. Push boundaries until boundaries dissolved, and all that remained was hunger. Always hungry, never satisfied, thirsting forever. The texts noted that Slaaneshi corruption was difficult to detect in early stages because it mimicked healthy human desires. The distinction between appreciating beauty and worshipping sensation was subtle. The line between healthy pleasure and addictive compulsion was thin. Many victims did not realize they were corrupted until far too late, until their souls were already bound to she who thirsts, until they had become the very thing they thought they were merely studying. I thought about the dreams, the sculpture's gesture, the blade that fit too well in my hand, the moment when I had wondered what release might feel like. The texts said corruption often accelerated after the victim became aware of their exposure. That knowledge itself could trigger the psychological crisis that broke resistance. That many of the corrupted chose damnation consciously, in full knowledge, because the alternative was living with the hunger. I closed the books, returned them to locked shelves. walked back through empty corridors to my hab cell as dawn broke over the basilica spires. The morning bells rang for prayer. I did not attend. I sat on my bed and tried to determine whether my choice to skip prayer was legitimate tiredness or early-stage corruption, whether my cynicism about the Imperium was justified skepticism or chaos-born doubt, whether I was still myself or already becoming something else. I could not tell. That was the trap. Once you started questioning, every thought became suspect. Every doubt might be corruption. Every moment of pleasure might be damnation. The only safety was absolute certainty. And I had lost certainty the moment I discovered the truth about Collection 47 Phi. I reported to work on time, passed the security checkpoints, submitted to Interrogator Velas's scan. He paused longer than usual, fingers pressed against my temple, psychic sense searching my thoughts. I felt his presence like cold water, probing, testing. Then he withdrew, nodded. Let me pass. I was still clean. Or he could not detect the taint yet. Or I had already learned to hide it. I did not know which. Vault 7 was exactly as I had left it. Collection 47. Phi waited behind armored glass, 312 items, each one a small piece of She Who Thirsts' influence, each one a calculated risk. I should return to my documentation, should complete my assignment, should trust that Prefect Mir's mathematics were sound, that my exposure was monitored, that I would be caught and purged before I became dangerous. Instead, I pulled the administrative access codes I was not supposed to have. Codes I had glimpsed over an archivist's shoulder months ago and memorized out of habit. Used them to access the full classification history for Collection 47 Phi. Found what I suspected but had not wanted to confirm. The review schedule was not random. Collection 47. Phi was reviewed every time an archivist died or was transferred. The reviews were not investigating classification accuracy. They were confirming that the sacrifice was still mathematically justified. 17 reviews over 4 centuries meant 17 archivists had died or been removed. Not 5. 17. And each time, an administrator had looked at the numbers, calculated the cost of reclassification, and decided that the deaths were acceptable. Heron Vol, Merson Cade, and 15 others whose names I did not know would never know, because their records were sealed after their executions or disappearances. 17 people fed to chaos-tainted artifacts to prevent a larger purge. 17 calculated sacrifices. I was number 18. The system was working exactly as designed. I spent the next 47 days trying to find an alternative. I reviewed every protocol, every regulation, every procedural option. There had to be a way to report the collection's true nature without triggering purge protocols. A way to get the artifacts properly contained without massacring everyone who had touched them. A way to save the innocents without sacrificing myself. There was not. The protocols were clear. Chaos taint required maximum response. Anyone exposed to chaos material was permanently suspect. Better to kill 99 innocent people than let one corrupted soul survive to spread damnation. The mathematics of triage applied without mercy. If I reported the truth, we all died. If I stayed silent, I died alone eventually, and the system continued grinding through archivists like fuel through a furnace. The only winning move was impossible. Reclassify the collection without investigation, contain the taint without acknowledging it existed. But doing that required authority I did not have, access to Vault 1 I could not obtain, and skills I did not possess. I was an archivist. I cataloged. I documented. I maintained records. I was not equipped to fix systemic failures that had persisted for 4 centuries. But I could not continue working with Collection 47 Phi, knowing what I knew. Could not handle those artifacts daily, feeling the psychological pressure build, watching for signs of corruption in my own thoughts. Could not live waiting for the moment when my next scan would fail, when interrogator Velis would detect the taint, when I would be dragged to interrogation and execution. Could not be the 19th sacrifice to bureaucratic mathematics. I requested transfer to a different vault, cited personal development, desire for new challenges, anything except the truth. The request was denied. Archivists were assigned to collections based on expertise and security clearance, and I had already invested 5 years in Collection 47Phi. Completing the catalog was my duty. Transfer would come after completion, estimated 7 more years. I requested leave for health reasons, cited stress, insomnia, need for psychological recovery. The request was granted. 1 week. During that week, I was required to remain in the facility, attend daily Vox confession, and submit to additional psychic screening. They were watching me now, waiting to see if I would break like the others. I spent the week in my hab cell, not sleeping, thinking in circles. The trap was perfect: stay and die slowly from exposure. Leave and die quickly from execution. Report the truth and die with everyone else. Every path led to death. The system was designed to ensure it. The Imperium could not afford mercy, could not afford inefficiency, could not afford to value individual lives over aggregate survival. Prefect Mir was right. The mathematics were sound. I was simply not important enough to save. Except Prefect Mir had also said something else, something that echoed through my thoughts during those sleepless nights. He had questioned his choice for 13 years, had wondered if he was wrong, had admitted uncertainty. But he had acted anyway, had made the choice he believed caused the least suffering, had carried that weight because someone had to. He was not a monster. He was exhausted, uncertain, human, making impossible decisions because the alternative was worse. What if that was the real horror? Not that the system was corrupted, but that it was logical. Not that evil people made evil choices, but that good people made terrible choices because all alternatives were worse. Not that the Imperium had failed, but that it was succeeding exactly as designed, grinding human souls into fuel to keep the machine running. On the 6th day of my leave, I discovered the final piece. I was reviewing my own documentation, checking for signs of corruption in my analysis, when I noticed something in the linguistic notes I had compiled. The Eldar word I had translated as "she who thirsts" was more complex than I had initially understood. The grammar included a prefix that suggested not just desire, but inevitability. Not "she who thirsts," but "she who must thirst." Not a choice, but a condition. Not an action, but a state of being. The Eldar language did not distinguish clearly between active and passive voice in that grammatical form. She who must thirst could also mean she who must be thirsted for. The hunger might belong to the goddess, or to her worshippers, or to something fundamental about consciousness itself. The ambiguity seemed intentional, theological even. I researched further, pulling texts I should not have accessed, using codes I should not have known. Found scholarly debates about Slaanesh's nature, about whether she was truly separate from her worshippers, or merely the collective manifestation of their desires. Whether she was created by Eldar excess or had always existed, waiting for civilization to advance far enough to perceive her. Whether she was monster or mirror. The most disturbing text was a fragmentary inquisitorial report, heavily redacted, from an interrogation of a captured cultist. The cultist had claimed that Slaanesh was not corruption, but truth. That she represented the fundamental reality that all conscious beings thirsted, hungered, desired. That Imperial faith demanded denial of that reality, constant discipline against nature itself. That Slaanesh offered release from the lie. That submission to her was not damnation, but honesty. That the greatest tragedy was not falling to chaos, but living an entire lifetime fighting against your own nature, dying without ever experiencing what you truly were. The report noted the cultist had been executed. Noted also that the interrogating inquisitor had requested extended leave immediately after, had seemed psychologically affected, had never fully explained his reasons. He had died 2 years later. Suicide. Like Heron Vol. Like so many who look too long at She Who Thirsts. I understood then. The real danger was not that Slaanesh corrupted you. The danger was that her logic made sense, that the promises were attractive, that the hunger was real, and you had been taught to deny it your entire life. And once you acknowledged it, the discipline became unbearable. That she did not need to twist your thoughts, because she simply had to make you aware of thoughts you already had, desires you already felt, hungers you had spent your life suppressing. The corruption was not external. It was revelation, and revelation was irreversible. I am sitting in my hab cell now, writing this testimony, my final documentation, the work I was always meant to complete. Tomorrow, I will report to Interrogator Velis and tell him everything. I will confess my exposure, my doubt, my fear. I will request immediate execution before the corruption progresses. I will choose death as myself rather than transformation into something else. But even as I write that, I recognize the corruption in the thought. The impulse toward dramatic martyrdom, the satisfaction in imagining my noble sacrifice, the pleasure in crafting this testimony as tragedy. She who thirsts feeds on all sensation, including the sensation of righteous suffering. There is no escape through death that is not also submission. There is no choice that is not compromise. This is what they understand, the architects of the Imperium, the Prefect Maris, who make terrible calculations. They know the trap is perfect. They know chaos offers no external corruption, but only reveals what was always internal. They know we are all hungry, all thirsting, all desiring. So they build a system that channels that hunger into service, that transforms desire into duty, that makes survival itself require the discipline that keeps us from falling. They sacrifice archivists like fuel, because the alternative is admitting the trap cannot be escaped, only managed. They kill thousands to save millions, because mercy itself can become excess, compassion can become weakness, any virtue pursued beyond measure can birth damnation. They build the Imperium as an endless grinding discipline, because the moment you stop grinding, the moment you allow rest or release or satisfaction, she who thirsts is waiting. And they are probably right. That is the horror I have finally comprehended. Not that the system is evil, but that it might be necessary. Not that good people are corrupted into monsters, but that good people must become monsters to prevent greater evil. Not that we have failed humanity, but that this grinding nightmare might be humanity's only survival. I spent my 7th day of leave in the Chapel of Eternal Vigilance, trying to pray. The words would not come. I knelt before the Golden Throne's icon, before the image of the Emperor in his eternal suffering, maintained for 10,000 years in agony, so that humanity might survive. And I finally understood what that symbol truly meant. Not sacrifice, necessity, the horror required, the mathematics made flesh. If the Emperor himself must suffer endlessly to preserve humanity, what right did I have to refuse my smaller suffering? What arrogance to think I deserved release when he had none. What selfishness to choose death over continued service, even service that would kill me slowly because it was uncomfortable. But that logic was also trap. The impulse to martyrdom, to find meaning in suffering, to transform pain into purpose. That too could become excess. That too could birth corruption. There was no safe thought, no pure motivation, no choice that did not contain the seeds of damnation. I left the chapel, returned to my hab cell, made my decision. I would request assignment to a different collection. I would fight the denial, use every procedural option available, appeal to every authority I could reach. And I would tell them the truth. Not about chaos corruption, not about Collection 47Phi's misclassification, but about my psychological state. That I could not continue working with xenos artifacts, that the exposure was destroying me, that I needed different duties or I would break. It was surrender disguised as resistance. It accepted the system's premise, worked within its procedures, sought relief rather than revolution. It abandoned Heron Vol and Merson Cade and the 15 others. Let their sacrifice continue. Let the next archivist face what I had faced. It was cowardice rationalized as pragmatism. It was also survival. My survival. The only choice that preserved anything of who I had been. I submitted my request formally the next morning, after Interrogator Veles passed me through psychic screening. The request was flagged immediately. I was summoned to Prefect Mir's office 3 hours later. He looked older than when we had spoken before, more tired, as though our conversation had cost him something. "Archivist Torreth," he said. "Your request for transfer is noted. I am curious about your reasoning. Your previous request cited professional development. This request cites psychological necessity. The language is quite specific, quite honest. I cannot continue working with Collection 47Phi, I said. I am experiencing significant psychological effects. I believe continued exposure will result in corruption. Interrogator Veles's scans show no taint. Not yet. But I know what happened to previous archivists. I know the pattern. I am asking to be moved before I reach that point. Prefect Mir studied me with his augmetic eye, that unblinking mechanical scrutiny that made me want to look away. If I grant this request, another archivist will be assigned. You know this. You have read the records. You know what you are asking me to do. I know. My voice was steady. I am asking you to save my life by sacrificing someone else's. I am asking you to do what you have done 17 times before. I am asking to not be the 18th calculated loss. And you can live with that? Knowing someone else will take your place? Knowing they will likely die as the others have? Could I? I had spent the night asking myself that question. The answer was ugly, selfish, profoundly human. Yes, I can live with it. I do not want to. But I can. Because the alternative is dying, and I am not ready to die. Even though your survival requires another's death? You make that choice constantly, I said. You told me yourself. 5 deaths versus 300. 17 archivists versus facility-wide purge. The mathematics of triage. I am simply applying the same logic to myself. My life versus someone who does not yet know they are at risk. I choose myself. Prefect Mir was silent. The office was very quiet. Just the whisper of his augmetic eye's servo motors tracking minute movements in my face. Finally, you have learned the wrong lesson. There was a right lesson? The right lesson is that someone must be willing to bear the weight, that someone must make the terrible choices, that refusing to choose is itself a choice, and usually the worst one. You are asking me to make the choice for you. to let you escape while damning another. That is not survival. That is complicity. Then what would you have me do? Stay and die? Report the truth and kill hundreds? There is no choice that does not require someone's death. You said so yourself. Yes. He leaned back in his chair, and I saw exhaustion in every line of his face. That is the nature of this work. There is no clean choice, no righteous path, only calculations that result in different distributions of suffering. But the person making those calculations matters, whether they bear the weight or pass it to another, whether they accept responsibility or hide behind procedure. I am hiding behind your procedure, I said. You created this system. You confirmed the classification knowing archivists would die. You set this machine in motion. I am just asking to not be crushed by it. And if I refuse your request? If I order you to continue working with Collection 47Phi? Then I will refuse the order. I will request immediate psychic examination. I will confess everything I know about the collection's true nature. I will force the investigation you have been avoiding for 13 years. I met his augmetic eye directly. I will burn it all down rather than let it kill me. That is my calculation, my triage, my choice. Prefect Mears smiled, and it was the saddest expression I had ever seen. There, that is the correct lesson, not the mathematics. The willingness to make the choice yourself, to accept the weight, to admit what you are willing to sacrifice and call it by its name. He pulled a data slate from his desk, made several entries. Your transfer is approved. You will be reassigned to Vault 12, cataloging recovered orc weaponry. Minimal psychological risk. You will serve out your career there, complete your work, retire with honor. Relief hit me like cold water. Then shame. And the next archivist for Collection 47Phi will be someone who does not yet know what they face, someone who still believes in certainties, someone who will serve until they break or die, and I will calculate whether their sacrifice remains mathematically justified, and I will sign the confirmation that keeps the cycle continuing. He looked at me with infinite weariness. You have escaped. You have chosen yourself. Now you must live with that choice. That is your weight to bear. I left his office, completed the transfer paperwork. Within 3 days, I was working in Vault 12, surrounded by crude orc weapons instead of elegant Eldar sculptures. The work was easier. The dreams stopped. I passed every psychic scan without incident. I was safe. I learned later that Archivist Henrin Solta was assigned to Collection 47Phi immediately after my transfer. She lasted 9 months. Then she began showing signs of corruption. Interrogator Veles reported her for heretical ideation. She was executed after brief interrogation. Prefect Mir conducted the classification review, confirmed the existing designation, and assigned Archivist Keelan Morth to replace her. I attended neither of their executions. I completed my work in Vault 12 with the efficiency that had earned my reputation. I was fastidious. I was thorough. I was complicit. This is my testimony. I am writing it 12 years after my transfer from Collection 47Phi, after learning that Archivist Morth has begun showing psychological symptoms, after calculating that I will work in this facility for another 23 years before retirement, after recognizing that every day I work here is another day I benefit from the system that killed Heron Vol, Mercen Cade, Henrin Solta, and 17 others whose names I never learned. I want you to understand what I have become. Not corrupted by chaos, not fallen to she who thirsts, but transformed by comprehension. I know the trap is perfect. I know we are all complicit. I know survival requires calculated sacrifice. that someone must die so others can live, that the mathematics are sound even when they are horrific. I know that Prefect Mir was right, that refusing to choose is itself a choice, that someone must be willing to bear the weight. And I know that I pass that weight to someone else, that I chose my survival over theirs, that I am alive because Henrin Solta is dead, that this testimony is written by a woman who let another die in her place and called it survival. The Imperium did not corrupt me. It revealed me, showed me what I would sacrifice to preserve myself, showed me the calculations I would accept when they benefited me, the mathematics I would embrace when I was not the one being subtracted. I believed I was good. I believed I served humanity. I believed my faith made me pure. I was wrong about all of it. The Emperor protects, yes, but protection requires sacrifice. The Imperium serves humanity, yes, but service sometimes means choosing who dies. Follow protocol, yes, but protocol includes allowances for calculated loss. Trust authority, yes, because authority makes the choices too terrible for individuals to bear. Unless you are that individual. Unless you are the calculated loss. Unless your name appears in the casualty reports, the execution logs, the sealed files of archivists who broke under exposure to artifacts that were knowingly misclassified for 400 years. Then the mathematics look different. Then the system shows its true face. And the most terrible truth is this. Even knowing what I know, I would make the same choice again. I would choose my life over another's. I would accept the transfer. I would let someone else die. Because survival is not noble. Because self-preservation is not righteous. Because when faced with your own extinction, almost everyone chooses themselves. That is what she who thirsts understands. Not that we are evil, but that we are selfish. Not that we worship pleasure, but that we worship survival. Not that we choose corruption, but that we choose ourselves. And that choice, repeated across billions of souls throughout thousands of years, creates the very gods we claim to fight. We are our own corruption. The Imperium's greatest horror is not external threat, but internal necessity. We must become monsters to fight monsters. Must sacrifice the innocent to save the innocent. Must calculate which lives matter and which do not, knowing that we will always calculate in favor of ourselves. I am alive. Henrin Solta is dead. That is the only truth that matters. That is the calculation I accepted. That is the weight I refuse to bear. This testimony will be filed with my personal effects. Perhaps someone will find it after I am gone, after I have completed my service and retired with honor, after I have lived the life Henrin Solta did not get to live. Perhaps they will understand what I am confessing. Perhaps they will judge me as I deserve to be judged. Or perhaps they will recognize themselves in my choices, will see the same calculations they have made, the same weights they have passed to others, the same survival they have chosen over sacrifice. Will understand that complicity is not aberration, but architecture. That the system does not fail when people like me make choices like mine. The system succeeds. The machine continues grinding. The mathematics remain sound. I want you to understand that I am not special, that my choice was not unique, that every day, across 1,000,000 worlds, in 1,000 facilities, humans are making this same calculation, choosing themselves, passing the weight, surviving at others' expense, building the Imperium one small calculated sacrifice at a time. We are not corrupted by chaos. We are corrupted by necessity, by mathematics, by the terrible logic of survival in a universe that demands more than any species can bear. And we tell ourselves it is service. We tell ourselves it is duty. We tell ourselves the Emperor demands it. But the Emperor says nothing. He sits in eternal silence on his golden throne, suffering for 10,000 years. And we project onto that suffering whatever justifications we need to continue. We make him into whatever God excuses our choices. We worship the idea of sacrifice while passing the actual sacrifice to someone else. I am complicit. You who read this, you are probably complicit too. We are all complicit. The system requires it. The mathematics demand it. The alternative is extinction. And we have decided extinction is worse than what we have become. She who thirsts hungers, but we thirst too, for survival, for meaning, for the belief that we are righteous when we are simply desperate. That hunger connects us to her more surely than any ritual or cult. That is the corruption we cannot name, cannot acknowledge, cannot purge. Because it is not corruption. It is human nature. It is what we are. Prefect Mir knew this. That is why he carried the weight for 13 years. Why he made the calculations that killed 17 archivists. Why he approved my transfer, knowing he was condemning another. He understood that someone must be willing to damn themselves. Someone must be willing to bear the truth. Someone must be willing to sign the execution warrants and live with the weight. I was not willing. I chose escape. I chose survival. I chose to pass the weight to another rather than carry it myself. And I call it survival. But Prefect Mir would call it cowardice. He would be right. This testimony is my cowardice made permanent. My refusal to bear weight recorded for anyone who cares to read it. My confession that I am alive because I was selfish. Because I calculated that my life mattered more than someone else's. Because when faced with the choice, I was not strong enough to choose martyrdom. I am not corrupted by chaos. I am corrupted by being human, by wanting to survive, by looking at the mathematics and choosing myself. That is what the Imperium makes of us. Not heroes, not martyrs, not servants of humanity. Just humans making human choices, sacrificing each other in careful calculation, building a civilization from calculated bones. I am Lysan Torreth, third archivist of the Xenological Collection, later transferred to Vault 12 for the remainder of my career. I served the Emperor faithfully for 38 years. I completed my assignments with precision. I retired with honor. I lived a long life. Henrin Solta did not. Neither did Keelan Morth, who was executed 17 months after my transfer. Neither did the archivist after him, whose name I never learned, who lasted 3 years before breaking, I am alive. They are dead. That is the calculation I accepted. May the Emperor forgive me. I cannot forgive myself. But I survived. That is what matters. That is what we have decided matters. That is the truth we serve instead of the Emperor. That is the hunger we feed instead of resisting. She who thirsts understands. That is why she is eternal. Because we are not consumed by her corruption. We are revealed by it. We are shown what we already were. And once shown, we cannot look away. This is the entire history that matters. Not the grand narratives of gods and civilizations, not the mythologies of birth and fall, but the small calculations we make every day, the weights we pass to others, the choices we make to survive, the hunger we feed with other people's lives. I am complicit. You are complicit. We are all complicit. That is the only truth. That is the only history worth recording. That is the corruption that needs no external source, because it was always internal. She who thirsts, she who must thirst, she who must be thirsted for. We made her. Through 10,000 years of calculated sacrifice, through a million worlds of impossible choices, through billions of souls each choosing themselves, each passing the weight, each surviving at another's expense. We made her, and she is us, and we cannot destroy her without destroying ourselves. That is what I learned. That is what killed my faith. That is the comprehension that broke me. I am alive, and I should not be. That is my testament. That is my confession. That is my corruption made permanent. May whoever reads this understand. May whoever reads this judge. May whoever reads this recognize themselves in my choices and know that they would likely make the same ones. Because that is human nature. That is survival. That is what we are beneath all the prayer and doctrine and faith. We thirst. We hunger. We choose ourselves. And she waits, eternal, patient, understanding what we refuse to acknowledge. We are her. We always were. The Imperium's greatest lie is not that we can defeat her. The lie is that we are separate from her. The lie is that our survival is righteous when it requires endless calculated sacrifice. The lie is that we serve humanity when we serve only ourselves. I lived. Others died. That is the truth. Everything else is justification. Everything else is hunger.